This realm, it's filled with evil, overcome by darkness. But what they don't know is that I am the darkness. They're scared to go to Macmillan now. They think I'm hiding there in the shadows. Because I'm Batman, is what I would say if I were. Hey everyone, today we're considering which of DBD's killers Batman could defeat and bring to justice. For this I've chosen the most recent live-action Batman as a reference point. We're also considering every killer's pre-Entity's Realm state for this, to make sure they aren't given entity buffs and so aren't untouchable. With all this in mind, which of them could outlast Batman's justice? Starting out with no reason to go for them. These are the characters that Batman would see no reason to go after, as they aren't criminals and aren't posing a threat of any kind. Spirit was simply an innocent student before the realm, trying her best to help her family financially and support her sick mother. Batman wouldn't even look her way. Artist was making provocative art and rebelling against her government. Nothing that Batman needs to stop, with it being very justified. Twins have killed, but it was basically all in self-defense due to being hunted their entire lives since birth for being conjoined. It's something Batman would surely understand and not pursue them for, with much bigger issues existing. He would let them off lightly. This tier is for the characters Batman would pursue with justice in mind, but might let them go for some reason, but not without a stern talking to, and potentially a few fists flying. Wraith is a character who had killed in his childhood in the midst of his country's civil war, and later, when he moved to the US and unknowingly contributed to his boss's disappearing service at Autohaven Wreckers. This can't really be blamed on him though, and AZHYMOVS is clearly the better target for Batman here, if Philip hadn't also killed him. I do think Batman would make sure to set Philip straight so there was no chance he'd do this again in the future. He still has killed a few people, even if they were all seemingly justified. Plague is a character in very different times to many of the other characters, but she undeniably does have some things to be brought to justice, like her many sacrifices. I could see Batman opting to do this by means of just explaining this to her though, or trying to guide her away from it, using violence as a last resort, but trying instead to convince her that her god is an evil entity. Legion finally are a group I do think Batman would take more pity on, seeing them as misguided youths and sympathizing a lot with them. He'd scare them straight, I think. Heading over to Mount Ormond, appearing all big and scary and saying, "I'm vengeance," and it'd probably scare them from doing it again. Granted, both Frank and Julie would need more than that and to be brought to justice, which is our next tier. He would bring them to justice. Bubba, whilst misguided, is also way too far gone and has done some truly horrendous things. Batman would bust down the doors to the Sawyer family house and take them out one by one, delivering them to Gordon. Trapper is another case where at one point he may have sympathized, but ultimately I don't think he can after Evan caused the mining disaster, killing hundreds of innocent workers. Batman could quite easily infiltrate the Macmillan estate in the guise of night, locating Evan, defeating him in a fight, and bringing him to justice. Billy is another similar case where he may feel some connection due to being raised essentially without parents, or feeling that void there. A different situation though, granted, with little Bruce also being a billionaire and not abused like Billy. Despite this, Billy still became a monster in his adulthood, and whilst some of his revenge could be viewed as justifiable, much of it is not, and is taken out on complete innocence, leaving Batman no choice but to take him down. Houndmaster is a formidable fighter and surrounded by her dogs, but this doesn't make her untouchable, even on the seas or her boat. Batman could fly in, he has areas to hide in and maneuver. There are options. He could easily bypass or restrain the dogs, and quickly get Portia cornered in her cabin. From here she may put up a decent fight, but he would certainly win with his greater armoring. He could then bring her to justice, easily transporting her away from the seas. Chucky is a character Vengeance would have no issue with him being sneaky and tricky, but hardly a match for Batman's strength or planning. He could swat him away and pin him down, turning him into Gordon by simply tossing him at their steps. Skull Merchant might be a little tricky for Batman, as she is in some way sort of his dark counterpart, a character who uses their millions to dress up as a character and fight people. Only Batman does this for justice and vengeance, whereas Merchant does it for cruel and twisted pleasure. I think Merchant therefore would actually make quite a good villain for Batman. Merchant may even take him as a target, with Wayne Enterprises sort of collapsing at the time of the Batman. He could lure her in after finding out who she is, and then subsequently whipping out his vengeance suit and making her flee from him when she attempts to hunt him down. From here she could be brought to justice. Trickster is a character quite easily brought to justice by Batman, with Batman able to easily track down what he's done, with him being quite sloppy and even leaving hints of his kills in his music. Batman would reveal the truth behind the beloved Trickster to the world, exposing him for who he really is. Vengeance would bring Trickster to justice. Deathslinger is a character quite easily brought down by Batman too, with Slinger being outclassed in almost every way. Batman has greater and more advanced tech, a stronger physicality and set of armor, and likely much better combat ability. Slinger could maybe lose Batman's trail for a while, but Vengeance would catch up to him. Ghostface would be a pretty classic Batman villain, with him able to outsmart and evade him at a few turns, having similar qualities to someone like the Riddler. He'd leave certain clues and likely be quite intrigued by Batman, wanting to play around with him. This would ultimately lead to his downfall though, with him slipping up and getting caught. Ghosty has some combat ability, but not to the extent of Batman. Once he has him in a room with him, Ghosty is going down. Clown is one of Batman's simplest solves. He could defeat him with ease, catching him off guard easily due to his sloppiness and turning him over to Gordon. I would say there's a chance the Clown's bottles and sedatives could counter Batman somewhat, but I honestly think he'd have the foresight for it, and wouldn't let himself be confined or without some sort of gas mask to breathe through. Pig may be a bit tougher to track down than some of the other killers. She's a bit sneakier and she would have less of a trail leading toward her, with Jigsaw being the person Batman would probably discover first. As one of his disciples and as a killer herself, at this time though, Batman would certainly seek to stop these twisted games. Once Batman had tracked her down, he could defeat her quite easily, only needing to be cautious of potential traps laid. Even if there were some though, it's unlikely they could do much to him. With him being mostly bullet and knife proof, Amanda would get caught. Huntress is quite a dangerous character to go for, with her being secluded in the Red Forest in her own territory, and capable of transforming into a werelk. Batman could utilize a lot of things in this case though, and make use of the pure darkness out in the Red Forest, completely away from civilization. He would have to be careful about fighting Huntress directly, but with use of the pitch black and a few various tools, he could take her down. Doctor was always pretty crazy, but before the realm he didn't have electricity shooting from his fingertips. He was essentially just a guy with a love for experiments. So long as Batman could break into Larry's, which he certainly could with his technology, he could quite easily capture Herman and turn him in, collecting all the evidence he needs by means of watching and surveying from afar. Hag is quite remote, out in a swamp somewhere, but definitely findable for Batman. She's a character who is also going to be surrounded by darkness at night, allowing Batman to get close easily, and make the most of it to overpower her. The hexes are something to be cautious of, but with Batman's tech he could surely detect their placement, or even capture Lisa from afar with a grapple of some kind. Quite easy, I think. Nurse is someone who pre-realm would be rather vulnerable, left hospitalized after the events of her law and the massacre of Crotus Pren. Batman could quite easily enter the hospital, retrieve her with no resistance at all, and leave her to Gordon. I mean, in her case, she's probably going to be arrested after she's recovered anyway, so maybe in this case Batman actually doesn't have to do anything. He would defeat them, but they'd escape. This is for those recurring villain types, characters he could beat but not quite bring to justice or turn in, with them escaping his grasp in some way. Knight is a character that I could see Batman defeating, with him also having a very tough suit of armor. Whilst he doesn't wield the same kinds of weapons, he does have various tools and vehicles at his disposal that could be used against Knight quite effectively, even with the help of his guards. Batman could rain down with his fists of justice, and I do think he'd be able to topple Tajos and the boys with great struggle, but I do think he could do it. Knight is formidable, but he hasn't met Vengeance. This is the perfect type of person Batman would want to take down too, someone who revels in causing pain and suffering. I don't think he could keep him down forever though, and would have to settle for teaching him a lesson. Dracula I think Batman could beat and maybe even kill, but of course he wouldn't go that far, which would ultimately be his downfall I think. I think he could put up a good fight though, learning about Dracula and his weaknesses, and priming his kit to fit these. He could fight him, weaken him, and maybe overwhelm him to some degree, but from here he'd either have to accept that this is the best he can do, or suffer a death at his hands, with him being unable to finish him or lock him away. It's not like Dracula is just going to accept this defeat either, but I think Batman could potentially beat him. Unknown is a character I do think Batman stands a chance for, with him being formidable at fighting, and Unknown seeming to not be that much stronger than humans, with it being a mass of tentacles beneath the skin suit. Batman would certainly have to be cautious, but I do think he could see through Unknown's deception, and even beat it in direct combat. if necessary, with him staying on guard and resisting any of Unknown's manipulation or deception tactics. Keeping it locked away though is another matter, and one I doubt is on the cards for Unknown. How do you keep this thing detained? It's quite unlikely. Singularity I could see Batman finding some sort of solution to defeating, with EMPs already being a mild counter to him. With the budget Batman has, I'm sure he could get Alfred to cook up some kind of EMP solution to Hux, weakening him and allowing him to take him down. Hux is smart, but I think with proper planning Batman could defeat him. Keeping him and turning him in any capacity would be difficult though, especially as Hux is able to just turn into sludge and reappear somewhere else. He would be a hard one to keep in one place, leaving Batman forced to keep hunting him down. Wesker is a character I do think Batman could beat, even with his Ouroboros and enhanced strength. Chris and Sheva after all defeated him, and so I think Batman has a shot. He has a lot more tech, he could whip out the Batmobile and cook him with the rear exhaust. There are options is all I'm saying. If the fight took place over a volcano, like it did in Resident Evil 5, I do think Batman could prevail, using Wesker's own rage against him, and using his strength but also tech to bring him down. Keeping him down would be a different matter though. This is where I think he would struggle, and Wesker would ultimately escape him. Far too intelligent to remain bound for too long. Blight is a character that may be tricky, but I don't think is out of Batman's possibility. Batman does have some good tech and is quite physically strong himself. Talbot pre-Realm is also nowhere near as strong. He's actually just sort of a crazy guy who may be slightly buffed up by some of his other serums. I do think though that just because of this he wouldn't be hard to capture. Talbot is sneaky and slippery, and I think he would be able to escape Batman's grasp in one way or another. He may have a warped mind, but he's also very smart. He'd escape and there'd be a long back and forth between them. Pyramid Head I think is a character that Batman could defeat, with him not being affected by Pyramid Head's existence or powers really. He maybe has some feelings of guilt, but these are largely unfounded ones. I think he could defeat Pyramid Head with not too much issue. It would be bringing him to justice that would be one. He'd be unable to even restrain him truly, or turn him in, with him constantly getting away. Myers I think he defeats quite easily, with him not being that much stronger than a human, and being quite capable of restraining him I think. The hard part would be keeping him there, with him having a habit for suddenly disappearing. He would fight hard but fail. This tier is for the characters he would try to fight, knowing he can't bring them to justice entirely, but still try nonetheless, ultimately failing. Vecna, I honestly think he would try. It wouldn't go well, but I do think he would at least try to inflict something onto him, but end up as a pile of bones. Xenomorph I could see him at least attempting to fight, but quickly seeing that this alien is far beyond him, being stronger, more advanced, stealthier, and more deadly. I think he'd try, fail, and leave it be. Sadako I could see him finding out about and attempting to fight, failing, realizing she's essentially immortal, and then going on a different route. This new route being buying up the land around the well and just pouring lots of concrete over it, or some sort of huge wall to make sure no one ever went to Sadako's location again, disallowing her from injuring anyone who came to the land. A unique approach, maybe not justice, but a prevention, and a good use of his money, right? To stop any more death. Pinhead is a character Batman could set a trap for, taking the box, then preparing to ensnare him. Whilst I do think he could get some good hits and damage in, I think he ultimately fails with Pinhead, with Pinhead simply being a far more powerful being, able to repeatedly summon chains to hold him back, and eventually pulling him to the labyrinth where there's no escape. Nemesis is another character I do think he'd attempt, even if it's ambitious. He could even try and defeat him by some crazy means like buying out Umbrella and decommissioning him, utilizing his wealth in this case to stop this BOW and the Raccoon City incident in its entirety. Fighting him would be another challenge, and whilst I do think he could get some good hits in, he wouldn't be able to do notable damage, due to being restricted largely to his fists, which are not even going to be felt by Nemesis. Oni is a difficult character to face, with him having incredible combat skill and insane strength, even pre-Realm. Kazan is known to have killed likely into the thousands, feared as a literal demon throughout Japan. Batman could try a few things, like some restraints or some direct fighting, however due to Batman's aversion to weapons, he'd struggle against Kazan's katana. He'd either barely survive or die in this case. Demogorgon I do think he'd attempt, purely because he would see it's possible to fight it, and therefore it's worth trying for his city. He would fail though I think, with no real means to damage or restrain it. I do think he'd survive the encounter, but very badly hurt from it. Freddy is a character that Batman would absolutely attempt to go for, but would ultimately fail, with him still being human and needing to sleep, and being unable to keep up with the relentless nature of Freddy, a dream demon who just keeps coming back. Batman may put up a facade, but he definitely has fears and a lot of trauma. You don't go around your city dressed as a bat fighting criminals without it. Kaneki is another case of Batman just simply not measuring up. Kaneki is far too physically strong as a ghoul, especially with his unique regeneration abilities. For someone like Batman, I just don't think he could take Kaneki down, let alone try to bring him to some sort of justice. He's an empowered ghoul who would only get stronger if he got a taste of Bruce's blood. He wouldn't even try. This final category is for the characters Batman would not even try to defeat or bring to justice, which I don't think is that many. In fact, I think it's just one. Dredge is the only character I could see Batman simply not even bothering with. There's nothing you can even really attack or damage on Dredge, and its weaknesses seem almost non-existent. For this reason, I could see Dredge being one of few killers Batman wouldn't push himself to try to defeat and bring to justice, but instead accept that it's an impossible task for him, an otherworldly being that barely resembles any living creature, with no discernible weaknesses, that only appears in darkness and dark areas. It's actually sort of a hard counter to him, if we think about it like that. Let me know who you think Batman could defeat and bring to justice. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.